everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. First, I'd like to thank you all for attending this webinar on a topic that I find both important and exciting. I hope you share this view with me and have some good comments, reflections, and questions once I've done my bit. This is what we're going to talk about today. After the introduction, I will talk something about managing quality in a complex system because, as you will see, this is important for us as accreditors or accredited. Then we'll discuss how to harness the power of accreditation. We'll take a look at impact and evidence. We'll review some current trends in accreditation. And we'll round up by some take-home messages before I leave it to you to ask. To help us share an understanding of what we are talking about, ISQua published these terminology principles in 2018. The aim was to promote a consistent use of terms used in the external evaluation arena. The principles of external evaluation and each of the different forms are defined in this document. But we must be aware that while it can be nice to sort things into neat little boxes, the real world is messier than that. There is no sharp delimitation between different types of external evaluation, and people sometimes use different words for similar things. So never judge an external evaluation program solely on what it calls itself. Do take a look inside. Having said this, accreditation programs in the ISQua or IEA family, they have much in common, not just because of this definition, but also because they're all rooted in the same international accreditation program, the IAP of ISQua. Here we have the formal definition of accreditation. It's not the exact words of the terminology principles, but it conveys the content of the definition. And not very surprising, it's an external, independent, third-party evaluation. Word noteworthy is that while it usually is of an organization, it could be of a system and a program as well. There are predetermined requirements. It's a service-wide approach. It may address more than legal requirements. It aims to promote continuous quality improvement, and it results in a report, and if you are successful, in an award. Even though this is not specifically stated in the definition, the purpose is to assess and declare whether the organization is fit for purpose. In other words, the ability of the organization, system, or program to fulfill its stated mission. The purpose of the assessment is therefore not to pass judgment on the past, but to assess if the prerequisites for good future performance are present. And these prerequisites looked for are robust structures and processes, both management and care processes. Accreditation can be driven by somewhat different aims. It could be the need to document to a stakeholder that you meet defined standards. It could be the need to bring everyone up to current standards. Or it could be a wish to move on to a higher level of performance than what has until now been the accepted standard. And all three aims may be relevant simultaneously for different parts of a standard set. The International Accreditation Program was established in 1999 and has been an important part of the ISQua package ever since. We have worked with around 70 organizations in 34 different countries. ISQua, or in fact actually its subsidiary IEA, does not directly accredit hospitals or other service providers. What we offer is a third-party external evaluation service to accredit the accreditors. And to do this, we have a team of 90 international peer review surveyors who do this on a voluntary basis. These individuals are based all around the world, and they're experts in the area of standards development and external evaluation. There are three different programs. One, which is a desktop assessment for the standards. The second, an on-site survey for the accrediting organization itself. And the third is a surveyor training program survey, which can be done as a desktop survey or as part of the on-site organizational survey. And as you see here, the IAP is present in all parts of the world, but there's still room for more. Okay, now we move on to the idea of complex systems. If we wish to understand how to make good use of accreditation, we must understand the context within which it is used. So here comes the complex systems. Very briefly, a complex system is a system consisting of many components connected by multiple relations, including nonlinear relations, in other words, feedback loops, and often also important relations to the surrounding world. This is clearly the case for most healthcare systems. Now, let us see what this means for us. This slide summarizes some important characteristics of complex system. The system is more than the sum of its parts. We say that it has emergent properties. This means that we can't understand the system just by understanding all parts of it. It means that the system, healthcare, is not entirely deterministic, neither on the patient level nor on the system level. It means that we cannot always predict the consequences of our actions, and we can't even expect that the same action will always lead to the same outcome. One example from another part of the life, we could say that raising a kid is a complex task. We can have several kids, they live in the same surroundings, we think we do the same things when we raise them, and yet they turn out to become very different people sometimes. What is the significance then of this? First, the complexity renders the system the ability to develop and learn, improve, which indeed is a very good thing, and one of the big advantages of complex systems. But there's also a risk for a drift into failure, as the title of the reference at the bottom of the slide tells you. Another thing to note is that complex healthcare systems have no natural boundaries. Boundaries are chosen for a purpose. Often we assess organizations when we accredit, but we might as well think otherwise. We could have a look at patient pathways instead, or at population, or care for the population of a defined area or an otherwise defined population. And what is it like then working in a complex system? Well, knowledge is limited and local. There is no one mastermind that knows everything and is able to steer everything. Couplings are important, and we need to understand these couplings, both the obvious ones and the ones that are perhaps less obvious. Variability of conditions is important. Things change, and we don't always know when, how, and why, and this means that trade-offs are necessary. Typically, one will be that we often have stood in situations where efficiency and safety could not be optimized at the same time, and we had to strike the proper balance between the two of them. And for a complex system to perform well, there will then need to be capacity and capability to make these trade-offs in a prudent manner. This leads us to two important concepts that you may have heard of when you heard presentations on Safety 1 and Safety 2. Those concepts are work as imagined and work as done. Work as imagined is the way we design our processes, the procedures and protocols we write about them, the plans we make, how managers think things are happening in the systems. And work is done is what's happening in real life. A linear system, a simple system, may actually work best if carefully designed work as imagined is directly and meticulously translated into work as done, the conveying belt analogy. But for a complex system, it's different. First, it's not possible to provide a pre-designed work as imagined for everything that could happen in the system. And this is not just impossible in practice, it's not just a practicality, it's also fundamentally impossible. And secondly, the adjustments needed, sometimes, often for good reasons, will lead to deviations from work as imagined. Many of these deviations will make things work more smoothly. Some will reconcile conflicting instructions. Some may cause adverse events, but some may also be what prevents an adverse event from happening. So all of this does not mean that there is no need for work as imagined. Some sub-processes within the system are in fact linear, and they should comply with some work as imagined. Work as imagined could be a first approximation, a good starting point when we decide what to do. And work as imagined is also a way to ensure, if we share work as imagined, that we adjust mutual expectations about how things should be done, unless something tells us otherwise. Of course, standardizing is a way of formalizing work as imagined. One of the mechanisms by which accreditation achieves its effects is standardization. When we do this, we do it in that way. In other words, we define our work as imagined. And this can actually serve to make the system simpler, reduce complexity by clarifying to the actors in the system what they can expect from the others and how they are supposed to interact with each others. In other words, we introduce traffic rules. And to spin a little more on that analogy, road traffic is surely a complex system, but imagine how much more complex it would be if we didn't all, more or less most of the time, abide with the same traffic rules. This doesn't make it uncomplex, but it makes it less complex. And standardization can also reduce complexity by making clear what we consider to be evidence-based best practice at the moment, without the need for everyone to scrutinize the entire relevant literature. Remember, by the way, that evidence-based medicine is not cooking book medicine. I can illustrate this with a parable from the world of cooking and cooking books. Professor Cecil Janssens, professor of epidemiology at Emory University in Atlanta, took a bread baking class. And from her experience with getting the dough right, she found an analogy to medicine. Making a good bread relies on mixing the right ingredients for the dough. This is a standardized procedure. But then we must be able to know how to knead the dough. We can partly, but not totally, describe it. I know, I tried it myself. And be able to see when kneading is enough. Know when to add a little more flour or water. Know when the rising is finished. Be able to recognize when the dough is where it needs to be. And she extrapolates to healthcare. Treating patients is choosing the best possible treatment based on a few indicators, observing if it works, and knowing what can and needs to be done if not. Standards can also be a vehicle for knowledge transfer. How exact must we be when we are writing the standard? Must we describe the practice in every detail, or should we leave some room for local adaptations? Take a tightening or a loosening approach, if you will. That's not something we can give one answer for that applies always. We must adapt to the situation at hand. The knowledge transfer must include presenting the core of the theory behind the practice to help implementers make the adjustments prudently. They need to understand the rationale behind the practice in order to be able to make principal deviations that serve to address local needs and contextual pressures, but to avoid departures that alter the core element at the heart of the approach and transforms it into something different. Another question is if standards should restrict themselves to codify the hard technical components, or should they include soft social components as well? Well, what do I mean by this? I mean that implementation of the practice is co-produced and delivered by healthcare staff, patient, and carers. They have to change the way they do things, and that's not always so easy. It would be a mistake to view the technical components as the hardcore of the intervention, while the social components are soft. Often the social components may be the most essential and the more difficult part of the implementation. A good example is the implementation that you probably know about of the central venous catheter bundle in the Michigan ICUs. This has been described in a wonderful paper, and it's very clear that there was a lot more to it than just establishing what the bundle was and telling it to everyone. I can recommend you to look this up and read it. Next question is how standardization could improve quality improvement. Well, obviously, standards can transfer knowledge needed to specific improvement, but just as important is the transfer of methodology for quality improvement, a methodology that will support quality improvement in all areas of the organization, not just where standards suggest specific opportunities for improvement. One more thing to consider. The most important difference between good and excellent may not be more or better work as imagined, more or better standards, more or better procedures. Carsten Engel's work on Safety 1 and Safety 2 shows us, and the same thing has been demonstrated in the study I quote by Liberati about a very safe maternity unit in Britain, that what's important is that you have the potential to anticipate what might happen, the potential to monitor how do we know if it does happen or is on its way to happen, the potential to respond in a flexible way, and the potential to learn. And these potentials we need to have both as individuals, but also as a collective. So I conclude, don't get me wrong, standardization is important, and it's an important part of accreditation, but it's also important to understand its limitations. Standardization should leave room for adjustments. Even safety can't be trapped entirely into rules. When it comes to delivering care that's effective and patient-centered to a person with 3 chronic and 1 acute condition, plus values and preferences of her own, good care is not just a sum of 24 guidelines. Accreditation was introduced 100 years ago to provide physicians with an environment where they could deliver their best. And it must still be the purpose to support all kinds of professionals in our system, not to replace them by algorithms. Policymakers, leaders, and managers must ensure that the system has a balanced set of rules and algorithms, and in addition, the capability and capacity to make decisions in specific situations. Okay, on to our next topic. How can we harness the power of accreditation? I start to present to you a kind of a model of what we're doing. We aim for a healthcare system with excellent performance over a broad range of outcomes. This is what I talked to you about when I said that the definition takes a whole service approach to performance. We know how our performance is by a lot of outcome data, many numerical data, but qualitative information may have a place here as well. The outcome is produced by a number of processes, primary drivers. We have care processes for specific conditions. We have generic care processes such as medication processes to handle specimens and results of tests, a number of support processes, and importantly also culture and attitudes. All of this contribute to make the system able to produce the outcome we wish for. There are secondary drivers as well, things that operate not on the system-patient interface, but on a higher level in the system. That's things like governance, management, clinical governance, quality and risk management, human resources management, IT management, etc., etc. And why are some of these in red text? That's because accreditation by standards that are IEA accredited is primarily concerned with the drivers marked in red on the figure. Most of them are secondary, but some safety critical procedures are also included. Some safety and some, so we can see some primary drivers enter into the IEI-based accreditation as well. Why don't all of the primary drivers enter? Well, first, it's impossible to manage a system solely by managing the primary drivers. You must manage from a higher level as well. And second, the sheer number of care processes precludes us from, for specific conditions, preclude us from include everything in standards. Note the feedback loop. Once we know what the outcome is, and it's perhaps not satisfactory, then we go back and change our secondary primary drivers, etc., etc. And of course, in such a system, there are also facilitators and barriers. Let's take a look at the facilitators. This is results from a very nice Canadian study where a large group of individuals participating in accreditation or quality management were interviewed to explore their views on how accreditation could have an impact. And these three things emerged. There must be coherence, the accreditation must be aligned with what's already in place in the organization, beliefs, context, the way they deliver their services. There must be organizational buy-in, and the organization must have the capability and the willingness to act in response to observations, feedback, or self-reflection resulting from the accreditation process. We could put it simple like, we have a problem and this is how we're going to solve it. That's the attitude that will facilitate an impact. So, accreditation should be integrated. It should be a part of the strategy of the organization, not an externally imposed add-on, nor is it something that you, if you're a CEO, can delegate to the quality department and expect them to take care of, disturbing clinical staff as little as possible, and leaving you with time to take care of the really important things such as finances. Apart from the problems with over-standardizing a complex system, a very rigid approach from the accreditor can also kill acceptance and motivation. Nitty-grittiness is a potent deterrent, so we subscribe to this statement by the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. And if you, as an organization that's on its way towards accreditation, if you think that a requirement is a mere technicality without a real meaning, then don't just do it. Think. Maybe you misunderstood the requirement or the way in which the accreditor will interpret it. And if you're still in doubt, ask the accreditor. This is a quotation I like very much. If the bureaucratic approach is prevailing, much energy will be used to demonstrate formal compliance with standards, but there will be no real willingness to change and improve patient safety. A similar thing can actually happen out of naivety as well. The surgical checklist has been shown to promote safe surgery in many different situations, but it failed to produce an effect in a large study in Ontario. One explanation put up for this was that the checklist was introduced as a ritual, performed without an understanding of what it was for. So the result was formal compliance, but no real change. You should also consider that sometimes something else is needed. This is one version of the regulatory pyramid. There are many other versions of it. The idea is that regulation influencing an organization from outside comes in different flavors, here characterized by the amount of force they apply. The level of force selected should be appropriate to the organization's ability and willingness to react. We have seen that the success of accreditation, and accreditation is roughly the mid-level of the pyramid, is dependent on a number of factors in the organization. If these are not present, the regulator must consider if it's possible to bring about these conditions, build motivation, supply resources, supply capacity and capability, If this is not enough, and change or is not possible, and change is deemed to be necessary, you may have to move upwards along the pyramid. On the other hand, you should also consider that there are probably domains that can do well with a low level of regulatory force and need not be included in accreditation. One simple example. In our Danish hospital standards, there was no standard saying that surgeons and nurses could scrub in before surgery. And that's obviously not because we don't think that's important, but that's because it's so deeply integrated in the culture that there's no need to enforce it anymore by standards and accreditation. Okay. Impact and evidence. The question is often asked whether there's any evidence for the effect of accreditation. The answer is yes, there is, and I'll illustrate with some examples from my own country, Denmark. I wish to stress that there is much published evidence from other countries as well, so this is not meant as a comprehensive review of the evidence in the field, but only as an illustration of what kind of evidence we can expect to find. We'll first take a look at healthcare professionals' experiences and attitude, and then look at performance and outcome. We asked private and public hospitals that had experienced at UNSA what their overall experience was, and as you see, it was quite good. The private hospitals were a bit more positive than the public ones, but also the public ones were quite happy. No one was totally unhappy, and only few were on the mid-levels. What did the survey reveal to them? Well, it did reveal some unknown quality issues, but not really many. But they were alerted to a number of issues they knew about, and perhaps the accreditation process, hopefully the accreditation process also stimulated them not just to know this, but also to do something about it. This is not very surprising. Our standards have much to say about management and clinical governance, also a lot about patient safety and the use of clinical quality indicators, of which we have a lot in Denmark. Patients' experience is or has been less strongly addressed and has been viewed as more difficult to improve by implementing procedures. And not surprisingly, the accreditation was found to be most helpful in the area of organizational quality, less so when it comes to clinical quality, and even lesser, but not, on the other hand, not entirely unuseful when it comes to patient experience. Put into words, this is what managers said about accreditation: promoting systematization, increasing standards, common language, also some concerns about paperwork, documentation, and bureaucracy. A quantitative survey of just over 5,000 hospital workers in Denmark found that the overall attitude towards accreditation was supportive. Managers were more supportive than nurses, nurses again more than physicians. They were not universally enthusiastic, but they were supportive. Even physicians were supportive. And they again found that they approved more of its usefulness when it came to organizational than to clinical or patient experienced quality. Very interesting was that we found a small group of physicians, around 5% of the respondent physicians. A small group was found to be extremely negative, as they answered 1.0 on all quality dimensions assessed on a Likert scale from 1 to 7. They were as negative as they could possibly be. Next question, does accreditation close the gap? Well, if we first look at the degree to which the accreditation standards themselves are met, we found here that after an initial survey in public, private hospitals, quite a number needed to do some more homework. They needed to follow up, but having had this opportunity and done the follow-up, almost all of them complied fully with the standards, and no one complied so badly that they were not able to become accredited. The same pattern we found in smaller units, GP clinics and specialist physician clinics. Actually here, most of them met the standard after they had prepared for survey, but still a substantial number needed more homework, but almost all achieved full compliance after this opportunity, and again, only few were not able to be accredited at all. If we now look at an impact beyond being assessed as compliant with standards, what are we then really looking for? First, we could ask, do organizations who perform well within a given accreditation program also perform well in terms of well in terms of other outcomes? Here we again have a number of studies from Denmark. We studied, or a group, it was not ICAS, it was an independent group. They studied all Danish public hospitals, and they found an association between accreditation outcomes and a number of other outcomes: lower 30-day mortality, shorter length of stay, no difference in acute readmissions, but more evidence-based hospital care as measured by a battery of clinical performance indicators. And the effect of mortality and length of stay persists over 2 successive accreditation cycles. Those who perform well at both cycles perform better than the others. Here we of course should ask ourselves, is this a cause-effect relationship? No, we can't state that based on these studies, and an alternative hypothesis could be that good leadership leads to good performance in terms of outcomes and in terms of achieving good accreditation status. We could then go on and ask if performance improves while an organization implements accreditation standards in preparation for accreditation surveys. And again, we have a Danish study. This is a timeline, and note that the timeline is not fixed to calendar dates, but to the dates where each hospital has its on-site survey, what is called a stepped wedge design. And this leads support to the belief that you actually accelerate your improvement rate while preparing for a survey. When we look at this kind of studies, we must first be aware that there must be something to improve in order for improvement to be demonstrable. There can be a ceiling effect. Another aspect of the ceiling effect is that when the same accreditation standards has been used over and over again, there's not perhaps much reason to expect that they will achieve even more. And if you are in the situation where the purpose is to catch up those who lag behind, then the effect may be diluted out on population basis and not able to be demonstrated on a population basis, but still be important for those who are in touch with the hospitals concerned. The third question could be, do organizations that participate in an accreditation program perform better than organizations who don't? Again, a study from Denmark, and wow, this seems to say that if anything, it's the opposite way around. But again, what is it we are really looking at here? We're looking at a period in time when delivery of evidence-based care was a strongly focused on topic for all hospitals in Denmark. It was based on the use of clinical indicators that were not specifically addressed in the accreditation standard used. So first, this would anyway have been something the hospitals were working with, and what we see here may actually be a temporary crowding out effect of accreditation. So when we look at this kind of studies, we must ask ourselves, what is it really that we are comparing? The next 2 slides I'll just show you quickly. It's a bibliography of research and accreditation in Denmark, and as I told you, there's much more in other parts of the world. You can have a look at this on the slides afterwards if you like. Now to some current trends in accreditation. The ISQua Accreditation Council in about 2 years ago asked its members what they think was trending in the international landscape of accreditation. And they asked these questions: what are the trends? How are trends in healthcare impacting on accreditation? What are the risks faced? And what are the innovations we could look for? And here are some of the trends that they identified. It's a focus on person-centered care. It's a focus on patient safety while balancing quality. After all, we are not there not to harm patients. We are there to do good, to help them solve their problems. There's increasing public awareness and pressure about the quality of care. There's increasing recognition of the value of accreditation. And there's also a strong desire to decrease the complexity of accreditation, decrease the workload. Accreditation should not be an extra work, it should be something that helps us. There's also increasing customization and focus on specialized area. And there may be a trend to move from organization to system accreditation. After all, the patient is often treated by several organizations and don't care if each organization does its part. The patient cares for the total outcome. There's a move from announced to unannounced visits, and a move from voluntary to mandatory accreditation. And there's also a desire that we should move beyond structure and process as a primary focus, increase focus on outcomes. I still believe that the accreditation process will be much about examining processes, but the goal should not to be to achieve compliance with pre-specified norms necessarily. The outcome should be processes that are likely to deliver the outcome they are supposed to deliver. And in response to the trends, there's more patient involvement. Patient become the role as surveyors. Patients are involved as a part of the accreditation program journey. They're interviewed by surveyors. Patients have representations on accreditation's organization's board. Risk-based and proportionate auditing based on the complexity of care and performance history of the service provider. And a trend to integrate care experiences of care recipients, for instance, by interviewing care recipients during survey and including findings in the report. There may be a trend from a move from accreditation 1.0 to accreditation 2.0, where instead of setting an agenda to achieve a defined aim, sorry, I see I got the numbers on top wrong. Of course, what we're moving towards is setting an agenda to achieve a defined aim instead of listing criteria, a compendium listing criteria for well-performing organization. We facilitate by indicating ways in which aim may be achieved instead of by facilitating by requiring specific structures and processes to be as a specific norm prescribes. We examine processes to understand why outcomes are as they are, instead of examining them for compliance with requirements. The survey thus becomes exploratory rather than examinatory. We judge on outcomes but report on mechanisms instead of judging our process compliance. More data sources contribute to assessment than solely the traditional survey methodology. And my intention is not to say that we should abandon one for the other, but that we need to use both in a balanced way. Some last take-home messages. I really believe that accreditation is a powerful way to promote realization of standards, and I think that there's data to support this view. But there are also pitfalls. Don't over-standardize, don't demand over-documentation, don't over-monitor, don't confuse quality assurance with one or several extra layers of quality control, and it's also worth to note that an external regulator influencing on the mid-level of the regulatory pyramid, as we do in accreditation. This could sometimes lead to the organization transforming it into a command and control approach within the system itself, which is not what is intended. We have seen this before. I want to show you it once again. These are important prerequisites for accreditation to have an impact. This I also wish to show you once again. And some last important points would be that accreditation standards are not a set of prescriptions for actions, but they are to be viewed as a tool for investigation of your organization. And on the same line, you could say, don't use the phrase, I prepare for accreditation. I implement the standards, and then I have the survey to give me a feedback on how my implementation went along. Accreditation is a mindset for the organization, not a task that can be delegated to an accreditation manager. Go for the learning value, not for the award. And I believe that if you do so, you will be awarded and get the award. Beware of over-implementation. Healthcare is a complex system. You can standardize many procedures, but not the system as a whole. So leave something out of the standardization, both because of this, but also because something, as I told you before, safely can be left at the bottom of the regulatory pyramid. It is so well ingrained, embedded in the culture that you don't need to use your energy on focusing on this. With this, I would like to say thank you for your attention. I hope you have some good questions or reflections to share. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carsten, for that fantastic presentation. And judging by the comments and the questions coming in, I think all of our audience shared my feelings and sentiments towards it. So our first question is from David Whitaker. It's a two-part question we have here. So is it important to involve all relevant staff in accreditation? And if so, how do you manage to get all the staff involved?
Yes. Accreditation is an organizational venture, as I told you. It must be seen as something that is important to the organization and involves all those to whom it is important, which is, in other words, all relevant persons. The only way to change a complex system is to make the actors in the system embrace the change. And how do you get them on board? Well, this is I guess this is here where the storytelling abilities of the leader can come into play. If the story told is this is something that someone has told us to do, so we do it. Then obviously you are in a quite other situation than if the story is we agree that we have this problem and this is how we're going to solve it. So this is really a question of leadership, getting people on board, having them understand why we're doing this, and demonstrating to them that this is something that management takes seriously.
Okay, great, thank you. So just looking, we have our next question is, how do you select patient surveyors?
Well, we don't use patient surveyors in our organization, so I have no personal experience of this. But what I've heard from other people is that first you must find someone who knows how it is to be a patient. Secondly, you must also find someone who is not advocate for one specific group of patients, and preferably also also someone who doesn't have a grudge on the system. Somebody who can give a critical, well-founded view and feedback, but give it in an assertive way. I don't think it's easy to find and train the right patient surveyors. I also think if you use pricing surveyors, you should not just use them because it's a symbol of the fact that you involve patients, you should do it because you know this is what they will contribute to the team, and that's how we will make them do that. In that way, they become full members of the team, and something that everyone will have to take seriously.
Excellent. Thank you, Carsten. Our next question is quite a specific one from Ernesto, who said, hi, I'm currently doing my part-time PhD research on the evaluation of ISO 15189 accreditation. Could you please point me to the right person or who could discuss this topic or scope with, please? I'm not sure if that's something you'd be knowledgeable of.
No, I'm not myself in the ISO world. I know that some of my colleague accreditors are, but I'm not the right person to answer that. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Carsten. Our next question is from Robin. So, given the outcomes of accreditation for private and public hospitals in relation to private health funding can be crucial, are there any considerations given to this in the effectiveness of the accreditation process?
Sorry, could you repeat this?
Sure. So given the outcomes of accreditation for private and public hospitals in relation to private health funding can be crucial, are there any considerations given to this in the effectiveness of the accreditation process?
I am not sure I entirely understand the idea of the question. Well, when it comes to private funding, obviously the aspect of accreditation that is that accreditation is a testification by a third party that you meet certain standards. This obviously is important when it comes to the private hospitals, and this is one of the reasons why private hospitals are accredited in Denmark, that insurance companies require it of them in order to feel safe about spending their money. I don't know if that answered the question.
Okay. Hopefully we'll move on to. So I have an anonymous question. So what is the importance or necessity of evaluating and changing accreditation standards? And what is the process for making these changes?
Well, I would hope that my presentation has made it clear to you that you can't expect or achieve anything from accreditation unless it's so to speak is in the standards. So accreditation can be no more than is the standards allows it to be. So evaluating and changing accreditation standards is essential. And the formal process for evaluating and changing standards is guided by the ISQua principles, Principle 1. But the point of the session today has been to convey to you that the standard set should not just be a compendium of good practices collected from elsewhere. You should consider what it is that you wanted to achieve with your standards and how they can bring this about in your context. What we have been talking about today was intended to give you an idea about how you could do this.
Great, thanks, Carsten. Our next question is, how do you make staff understand the significance of documentation in accreditation?
Well, that's one of the things that staff always complain about, why we have to document everything. Well, we try to take the perspective that documentation is not there to prove anything to us. The documentation we require is the documentation that is needed for healthcare to be delivered in a safe manner. And in most countries, if not all countries, there are also legal requirements, and whether we like these legal requirements or not, we'll have to comply with them. And often, that's the point you could make, is that even some documentation that may not seem to be very useful in the day-to-day practice may turn out to be very, very valuable to you if you get a complaint or a litigation case.
Excellent. Thank you, Carsten. Our next question is from Nicholas. You might have touched on this previously, but well, first of all, thank you for the insightful presentation. And what is the most productive and effective way to involve the patient voice in the design and development of accreditation standards?
Well, personally, I think that on a high level, what we're aiming for is good outcome. And nowadays, we cannot define good outcome without asking the patients what they think of good outcome. So they have a part when they I think they do have a role to play when we set the standards. But the patient voice is also used in a lot of ways inside the system today. And I think that we will see that more, I would not perhaps say standardized way, but ways to involve patients in care decisions supported by decision-making tools, I think will become an important part of accreditation in the future.
Excellent, thank you. So a question from Edward, based on your experience of both voluntary and mandatory accreditation, which one do you recommend, or do you recommend one over the other?
I don't recommend one over the other, but you must recognize that they are on different levels of the regulatory pyramid. The mandatory is a little bit higher to the top, and if you are in a system where accreditation is mandatory, you will have some clients that are not as motivated as others. That is a challenge, and you have to and you have to consider this when you design the system. I think you should not take for granted that exactly the same standards could be used for both types of accreditation. You can demand more of people if they go into it themselves. On the other hand, I think that mandatory accreditation has a role to play because it's a bit softer than pure command and control, but it has, as shown by our results, for instance, and most of the accreditation in Denmark is mandatory, it does make a difference.
Excellent, thanks, Carsten. So our next question is, how do you maintain the quality of healthcare and the culture of healthcare workers after the accreditation process?
Well, the idea should be that the accreditation process is not a freestanding thing. It's a way to implement what the standard says. So if you meet all the standards, then you should, of course, be aware of how to sustain performance. But in many cases, in many situations, there will then be new requirements to meet, so that you move up and on performance levels.
Okay, great. Is there any solution to an accreditation agency demanding over-documentation? This person specifically has seen it happening in India, and it affects patient care.
Well, I mean, there is no. I can't think of any mechanism to force less documentation on them from outside. No, but you have to discuss this with them, and you have to take a dialogue and try to make them understand your situation, and you should, of course, also try to understand their situation. Maybe they have a point that you have not understood yet, but there's no easy way to fix it.
Perfect. Thanks, Carsten. Our next question is from Akio, who said, thank you for your great presentation. It seems that many hospitals see the accreditation as a sort of exam that they need to pass, or an inspection, and they view it as a burden to day-to-day work. So how would you go about changing their mindset?
Well, the short answer would be communication. But one reason for the shift from announced to unannounced service is to take away this perception of an exam and instead saying, well, you're doing your work, and from time to time someone will pop up or take a chat with you about how things go on. I know that given that an accreditation will end with an award that may mean something to you, that's not so easy, but that's one way of doing it. Communication, perhaps also unannounced surveys.
Great, thanks, Carsten. Our next question is from Hassan. Is there any good example of an accreditation body that is not a complete third party? For example, a body that is originating from the same regulator, like the Ministry of Health?
Well, there I don't know how I can't explain to you the exact construction, but in France at least, accreditation is done from within the agency that also is the regulator. But I believe that there are some compartmentalization in this. And we could spin a little about this. What is the role of the national state with regards to the accreditation body? Well, if you have a national healthcare system, the accreditation body will need to be able to make assessments and decisions that are not influenced by the state. But the state will have a legitimate interest in influencing the standards and must, in other words, influence what is being assessed. But the assessment itself should be independent.
Excellent, thanks, Carsten. And I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here. I see we're just coming on to 1 p.m. now, so we might have time for one more question. So our last one is, how do you manage physicians that react negatively towards accreditation?
Well, our experience is that surveyor attitudes and surveyor behavior has a very important role to play. Peer surveyors may sometimes be relatively expensive to use, but it's our experience that being met by peers who can talk from the same position as the position you're in will take much of the brunt off accreditation. This is, of course, late in the process. Early in the process, we must try to communicate, but we must also realize that you will remember from one of my Danish slides that 5% of the physicians were absolutely against accreditation, and there's probably not much we can do about that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Carsten. We're just 1 o'clock now. Sorry, this is Dublin time, so conscious that we need to wrap up, and I'm sure you have other engagements today. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. That was a fantastic presentation, and judging by the interaction between all of our participants in the chat, and there are still almost 30 questions that have been asked, so I don't think we're going to get to all of them, unfortunately. So just a reminder to everyone who joined us today that the recording of the webinar will be available on the ISQua website in roughly 24 hours time, and you'll receive a link to this as soon as it's available, so that should be with you tomorrow. If you enjoyed today's presentation and you'd like to learn a bit more about the accreditation process, you can check out the ISQua Fellowship Program that has lots of content relating to accreditation, and also a special certificate in fundamentals of external evaluation. There is also a specific track on accreditation in the upcoming ISQua conference in Florence at the end of August, so if that will be of interest, then please feel free to check it out. To improve the quality of our webinar, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could fill in the post-webinar survey, which will only take 2 minutes for you to do. And that is it. Finally, sincerest thanks to you, Carsten, for joining us today for that fantastic presentation, and to everyone who joined us here today. So have a good day, everyone, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Carsten.
Thank you.